The warning came from the most unlikely source imaginable. A drunken trader in a seedy cantina on the outer rim world of Kelthara Prime. Captain Vexahai of the Hegemonic Intelligence Division had been tracking smuggling routes when the old Thraxian spacer grabbed his sleeve with a trembling claw. "Don't go to the Sol system," the trader wheezed, his multiple eyes darting around the smoky establishment. "The humans, they're not what they seem. That whole region of space, it's wrong. It's been wrong for centuries." Vexai had heard such tales before. Every species had their ghost stories about remote systems and dangerous neighbors. The galaxy was full of superstitious cargo haulers who saw monsters in every asteroid field. He started to pull away, but something in the Thraxian's voice made him pause. "I've been trading for 60 cycles," the alien continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, "seeing things that would make a Vorthan warrior wet himself. But that region around Terra, Captain, ships go in there and come out changed, if they come out at all." The Thraxian's primary hand dug into a worn leather pouch, producing a data crystal that looked like it had seen better decades. "My cousin's ship, the Prophet's Edge. They went to make contact with human merchants 3 years ago. Standard first contact trading mission, nothing unusual. They came back 6 months later, but..." Vexai accepted the crystal, noting how the trader's hand shook as he released it. "But what?" "They weren't the same crew." "Oh, they looked identical. Same biosignatures, same memories, same scars and tattoos. But they were different. They moved wrong. Spoke in perfect unison sometimes when they thought no one was listening. And their cargo, the cantina's lights flickered, casting strange shadows across the Thraxian's weathered features. Outside, the perpetual storms of Kelthara Prime rumbled against the reinforced windows. Their cargo bay was full of metals that don't exist in any periodic table, alloys that bent light around them. And wrapped in each shipment was a message written in perfect Thraxian script, though they claimed to have never learned our language. The trader leaned closer, his breath reeking of fermented stim juice. The messages all said the same thing. "Thank you for the invitation. We look forward to meeting your friends." Vexay pocketed the crystal, already mentally filing the encounter under Rimworld nonsense. But protocol was protocol, and Intelligence Division took reports from all sources seriously, no matter how unreliable. "I'll look into it." "Don't," the Thraxian said urgently. "I'm telling you this because someone needs to know, needs to have a record, but don't go looking for trouble with the humans. They've been preparing for something for a very long time, and whatever it is, we don't want to be the ones who trigger it." The conversation might have ended there, filed away and forgotten among thousands of similar reports, if not for what happened 3 weeks later. The hegemonic empire's Grand Admiral Korvash was reviewing quarterly expansion reports when his aide burst into the command chamber without announcement, a breach of protocol that would normally result in immediate execution. The fact that Admiral Korvash merely raised an eyebrow spoke to the severity of whatever news the aide carried. "Sir, we've lost contact with the Epsilon Eridani research station." Korvash set down his datapad with deliberate care. The Epsilon Eridani station was one of their most advanced deep space facilities, positioned strategically at the edge of what preliminary surveys had identified as the Terran sphere of influence. It housed over 50,000 researchers, military personnel, and support staff, hardly the type of facility that simply vanished. "Define lost contact," the Admiral said calmly. "Complete communication blackout as of 0800 hours. Number distress signals. No automated beacons, nothing. Long-range sensors show the station is still there, still powered, but..." The aide's voice faltered. "Continue."
"Sir, the station appears to be broadcasting on frequencies we've never seen before."
"Complex mathematical patterns that our xenolinguist department says might be some form of language, but unlike anything in our databases. And there's something else." Admiral Korvash stood, his massive frame casting shadows across the holographic star charts that dominated the chamber. As a member of the hegemonic empire's ruling Corvani species, he stood nearly 3 meters tall, with natural armor plating that had turned deep crimson with age and battle experience. His forearms moved with practiced efficiency as he activated various displays. "Show me." The main hologram shifted to display the Epsilon Eridani system. The research station hung in space exactly where it should, its familiar angular architecture unchanged. But as Vexai watched, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The station was rotating. Not the normal operational rotation for artificial gravity, this was something else entirely. The massive structure was performing a slow, complex dance around its orbital position, moving in patterns that would require impossible precision and coordination. It was beautiful, hypnotic, And utterly wrong. How long has it been doing that? Korvash asked. We're not sure, sir. The movement is so gradual that it took our computers several hours to detect the pattern. But based on the current position and projected trajectory, the aide paused, double-checking his calculations. It began approximately 6 hours after the communication blackout. And the crew? No life sign readings, but that could be due to some form of interference. The station's hull appears to be changed somehow. Our sensors are having difficulty penetrating it. Korvash studied the display for several long moments. In his 2 centuries of service to the Empire, he had conquered 17 star systems and subjugated dozens of alien species. He had seen weapons that could crack planets and technologies that bent reality itself. But something about this situation felt different, felt wrong in a way that bypassed rational analysis and spoke directly to predatory instincts honed over millions of years of evolution. Dispatch a reconnaissance fleet, he ordered finally. 3 heavy cruisers and a full support squadron. I want answers. The aide hesitated. Sir, given the proximity to human space, shouldn't we notify the diplomatic corps first? The treaties signed after the initial contact, the treaties, Korvash interrupted, covered direct incursion into Terran territory. Epsilon Eridani is in neutral space, well outside their claimed borders. We have every right to investigate what happened to our people. As the aide departed to implement the orders, Admiral Korvash remained staring at the holographic display. The station continued its impossible dance, and something deep in his genetic memory, something that had kept his ancestors alive on a hostile homeworld for millions of years, whispered warnings he was not yet ready to hear. The reconnaissance fleet launched 12 hours later under the command of Captain Jalkar, one of the Empire's most experienced deep space commanders. 3 state-of-the-art heavy cruisers, the Domination, Supremacy, and Conquest, along with their escort vessels, represented enough firepower to pacify a small star system. They reached Epsilon Eridani in 18 standard hours. Captain Jalkar's final transmission would later be studied by cryptographers and xenopsychologists across the galaxy. The station, it's singing to us. Beautiful music, mathematical perfection. The crew is still aboard. We can see them through the viewports. They're dancing. All 50,000 of them moving in perfect synchronization. They seem happy, peaceful. And they're looking at us. All of them at exactly the same time. Static filled the channel for 37 seconds. Then, in a voice that was recognizably Captain Jelkar's but somehow wrong, too calm, too measured, lacking the rough edges of his usual military bearing, Admiral Korvash, please disregard my previous transmission. We have made contact with the station personnel. They are well and have made remarkable discoveries about the nature of consciousness and collective harmony. We request permission to extend our mission parameters to conduct joint research with their team. Captain, Admiral Korvash's voice crackled through the subspace communicator. Your mission parameters are to investigate and report. Return to base immediately. I understand your concern, Admiral, but the opportunities here are unprecedented. The humans have shared remarkable insights about the interconnected nature of all sentient life. We are learning so much. The transmission quality was perfect. No static, no lag, none of the normal distortions associated with deep space communication. It was as if Captain Jelkar was speaking from the next room rather than from another star system. Captain Jelkar, you will return to base immediately or face court-martial.
Of course, Admiral.
We understand. We will return as soon as we complete this final phase of research. The humans have been so helpful, so welcoming. They've shown us such wonderful things. The transmission ended. That was 8 days ago. Now, Admiral Korvash stood in his private quarters, staring out at the stars through reinforced transparasteel windows. The reconnaissance fleet should have returned 6 days ago. Long-range sensors showed all 4 ships still in the Epsilon Eridani system, but they were no longer responding to communications. Worse, they appeared to be moving in the same complex orbital patterns as the research station. A beautiful, intricate dance that spoke of perfect coordination and purpose. The data crystal from the drunken Thraxian trader sat on Korvash's desk, still unexamined. Intelligence Division had dismissed the report as unreliable, filed it away among thousands of similar accounts of strange encounters in the galactic rim. But now, as Admiral Korvash faced the prospect of having lost not just a research station, but an entire military fleet to something inexplicable, the trader's words echoed in his memory. They've been preparing for something for a very long time. Korvash activated his personal computer and inserted the crystal. The data that flowed across his screen made him sit down heavily in his command chair. Shipping records, hundreds of them, dating back over 3 centuries. Each one documented a trading vessel that had made contact with human merchants or visited the Terran system. The pattern was subtle, so subtle that it had taken the Thraxian trader years to notice it. Ships would return from human space with slightly different crew complements than they had left with, not missing crew members, but different ones. Genetic scans showed identical DNA, but behavioral analysis revealed subtle changes in personality, speech patterns, and decision-making processes. More disturbing were the cargo manifests. Every ship that had made multiple trips to human space began carrying unusual items, technologies that were slightly more advanced than they should be, alloys with properties that didn't quite match known materials, data storage devices that contained information in formats that shouldn't have been compatible with their systems. The final entry in the crystal made Admiral Corvash's blood freeze. It was a personal note from the Thraxian trader, written just days before their encounter in the cantina. "I've been watching the shipping lanes for 60 cycles, and I've finally figured it out. The humans aren't just trading with us, they're studying us. Every ship that visits their system comes back with something new, something that gets incorporated into our technology, our culture, our way of thinking. They're not preparing to invade us. They're preparing to understand us so completely that invasion becomes unnecessary. The worst part is that I think it's working. I catch myself sometimes thinking thoughts that don't feel like mine, making decisions that serve human interests without realizing why. The changes are subtle, progressive, almost beneficial. We're becoming better traders, better negotiators, more efficient in our operations. But we're becoming something else too, something that serves their purposes. I'm writing this note as a baseline, a record of who I was before the influence becomes too strong to resist. If you're reading this, and if you have any wisdom, you'll stay away from the Sol system, because they're not conquerors in the traditional sense. There's something much more dangerous. They're gardeners. And we're the garden." Admiral Corvash sat in silence for nearly an hour, processing the implications. Outside his window, the stars continued their ancient dance, but now they seemed different somehow, as if they were watching him with patient, knowing eyes. The communication console chimed softly. A message from the outer rim marked as urgent priority. "Admiral Corvash." The voice belonged to Captain Jelkar, but the transmission was coming from a hegemonic patrol vessel 3 systems away from Epsilon Eridani. "I'm pleased to report that our mission was a complete success. The research station personnel are safe and have made remarkable breakthroughs in consciousness studies. I'm returning to base with full documentation of their discoveries." Corvash's hands trembled slightly as he checked the source coordinates. The transmission was definitely coming from Captain Jelkar's ship, but long-range sensors still showed all 4 vessels of the reconnaissance fleet in orbit around the research station, continuing their strange synchronized dance. "Captain," Corvash said carefully, "please provide authentication code Omega-77. "Of course, Admiral. Omega-77 authenticated. Is there something troubling you? You sound tense." The authentication was correct. Perfect, in fact. No hesitation, no delay that would indicate the captain was looking up the code. But Admiral Corvash had changed that particular authentication sequence just 3 days ago, after the original reconnaissance fleet had stopped responding to communications. Captain Jelkar couldn't possibly know the correct response, unless he wasn't actually Captain Jelkar, or unless he was Captain Jelkar but had access to information he shouldn't have. Admiral Corvash closed the channel without responding and immediately activated the highest-level security protocols. If the humans could somehow duplicate their personnel perfectly enough to fool genetic scanners and authentication systems, then the Empire faced a threat unlike anything in their recorded history. He thought again of the Thraxian traders' warning about the nature of the human threat. Not conquerors, but gardeners, not seeking to destroy or subjugate, but to understand and influence. As he began composing an emergency report to the High Command, Admiral Corvash wondered if it was already too late. How many of his own crew might have been influenced during their routine missions to the Outer Rim? How many hegemonic citizens across the galaxy had been subtly changed through contact with human traders and diplomats? How many of his own thoughts and decisions over the past few months had truly been his own? The question terrified him more than any fleet or weapon ever could. High Command received Admiral Corvash's report at 0300 hours Galactic Standard Time. By 040, emergency protocols had been activated across 12-star systems. By 0500, the hegemonic empire's most senior military and intelligence officials were gathered in the secure conference chamber deep beneath the capital world's surface. Grand Marshal Vorthak, supreme commander of all hegemonic military forces, reviewed the data with growing unease. His species, the Korathi, were known throughout the galaxy for their analytical minds and emotional control, but even he found it difficult to maintain composure while reading about the systematic infiltration of Imperial space.
How long has this been going on without our knowledge? He asked the assembled intelligence chiefs.
Director Shalneth of the Infiltration Prevention Division shifted uncomfortably. As a member of the highly evolved Mentari species, she possessed natural telepathic abilities that made deception nearly impossible to maintain in her presence. Her obvious distress spoke volumes about the severity of the situation. Based on the shipping records provided by Admiral Korvash's source, we're looking at a minimum of 300 standard years, she replied, possibly longer. The human expansion into space appears to have been deliberately slow and methodical, designed to avoid triggering our early warning systems. 3 centuries, Grand Marshal Vorthak repeated slowly. They've had 3 centuries to study us, to infiltrate our shipping networks, to place assets throughout our territory. How is it possible that we missed this? Director Vexton of Strategic Intelligence cleared his throat nervously. Unlike the other officials present, he was human, or appeared to be. The hegemonic empire had encountered the Terran species approximately 50 years ago during routine exploration of the galactic outer rim. First contact had proceeded normally, with cultural exchanges and limited trade agreements established according to standard protocols. The irony of a human serving in the Empire's intelligence apparatus was not lost on anyone in the room. If I may, Director Vexton began. The methodology described in these reports represents a level of long-term strategic planning that surpasses anything in our historical databases. Most species, when they achieve faster-than-light capability, immediately begin aggressive expansion or attempt to establish contact with major galactic powers. Humans did neither. He activated a holographic display showing the gradual expansion of human presence in the galaxy. Instead of the typical rapid burst outward from their home system, human expansion had been almost organic in nature. Slow, careful tendrils reaching out to make contact with minor trading partners and independent colonies. They spent 2 centuries establishing relationships with merchant guilds, mining operations, and frontier settlements, before making any attempt to contact major galactic governments. Vexton continued. By the time we encountered them officially, they had already built extensive intelligence networks throughout the Outer Rim. Grand Marshal Vorthak studied the Human Intelligence Director with new interest. Director Vexton, given the nature of this threat, I must ask, how certain are we of your own loyalties? The question hung in the air like a weapon waiting to discharge. Every official in the room turned to look at the human, waiting for his response. Director Shalneth leaned forward slightly, her telepathic abilities focused on detecting any deception. I understand your concern, Marshal, Vexton replied calmly. And I share it. If the humans have been conducting a centuries-long infiltration campaign, then my very presence here could be part of their strategy. I would recommend immediate psychological evaluation and isolation until this situation is resolved. The honesty of the response surprised everyone present. Director Shalneth's telepathic scan detected no deception, no hidden agendas, no mental barriers that might indicate conditioning or mind control. Yet the absence of such signs could itself be evidence of more sophisticated manipulation. That won't be necessary immediately, Grand Marshal Vorthak decided, but you will submit to continuous monitoring during this crisis. Your insights into human psychology may be valuable, regardless of their ultimate source. The meeting continued for 6 hours, as intelligence reports flooded in from across the Empire. The pattern that emerged was both subtle and terrifying. Human influence had spread like a virus through the galactic economy, carried by traders and merchants who had made contact with Terran representatives. Each contact point became a node for further expansion, with modified ships and crews spreading the influence to new systems. The modifications weren't violent or obviously hostile. Ship performance improved, crew efficiency increased, trade relationships became more profitable. On the surface, contact with humans appeared beneficial to everyone involved, but the cumulative effect was a galaxy-spanning network of assets that could be activated whenever humanity decided to reveal their true intentions. We need to understand their endgame, Grand Marshal Vorthak declared, as the session moved into its 7th hour. Are they preparing for conquest, economic domination, cultural assimilation? Without knowing their ultimate objective, we can't formulate an effective response. The answer came from an unexpected source. Deep in the archives of the Imperial Historical Society, an elderly Corvani scholar named Threndak had been studying ancient legends and myths from primitive species throughout the galaxy. His work was considered academic curiosity rather than practical intelligence, But the emergency broadcasts from High Command had triggered his memory of certain recurring patterns in galactic folklore. Grand Marshal. Threndak's communication reached the conference chamber as the officials were beginning their 8th hour of crisis planning. I believe I have relevant information regarding human long-term strategy. The scholar's holographic image appeared in the center of the conference table, showing a wizened figure surrounded by data crystals and ancient texts. His multiple eyes gleamed with the intensity of discovery. For the past 40 years, I have been cataloging oral traditions and mythological cycles from pre-spaceflight civilizations across the galaxy. Many species possess legends about visitors from distant stars, beings who came not as conquerors or gods, but as gardeners and shepherds. Threndak activated his own display, showing a complex web of connections between different civilizations and their ancient stories. The legends are remarkably consistent across species and time periods. The visitors arrive during the species' pre-technological phase, provide subtle guidance and assistance, then withdraw to observe from a distance. When the species achieves spaceflight capability, the visitors return to evaluate their progress. You're suggesting that humans have been monitoring galactic civilizations for millennia? Director Shalneth asked. Not monitoring, Threndak corrected. Cultivating. The legends describe a species that seeks to guide the development of intelligent life towards some greater purpose. They intervene only when necessary to prevent extinction-level conflicts or technological disasters. They shape cultures and belief systems through careful introduction of ideas and technologies. Grand Marshal Vorthak felt a cold understanding beginning to form. They're not preparing to invade us, they're preparing to harvest us. Harvest is perhaps too crude a term, Threndak replied. Based on the mythological patterns, humans appear to be cultivating galactic civilization toward a specific evolutionary endpoint. They want us to develop in particular ways, to achieve certain technological and social milestones, to become something more than what we currently are. The implications were staggering. If humans had been guiding galactic development for thousands of years, then every major technological breakthrough, every cultural shift, every political evolution might have been orchestrated to serve their ultimate design. But why now? Director Vexton asked. If they've been working toward this goal for millennia, what has changed that made them accelerate their timeline? The answer came from Admiral Corvish's newest intelligence report, transmitted from the Outer Rim, just as the conference entered its 9th hour. His message was brief and chilling. Human activity has increased dramatically across all monitored sectors. Ships are emerging from deep space locations that weren't previously known to be inhabited. These vessels display technology levels significantly beyond what we observed during first contact. They are not hiding anymore. Whatever they were waiting for, it has begun. The holographic display in the conference chamber updated with new data from Admiral Corvash's observations. Dozens of human ships were moving through space near the borders of Imperial territory, but they weren't following normal navigation patterns. Instead, they seemed to be positioning themselves at specific coordinates that formed a complex three-dimensional geometric pattern. They're building something, Director Shalneth realized. Some kind of massive structure or configuration in space itself. As the officials watched, more human ships appeared on their sensors, moving to occupy additional positions in the pattern. Each ship was massive, far larger than anything humans had previously revealed, and they were arriving from directions that suggested they had traveled vast distances to reach these specific coordinates. How many ships are we looking at? Grand Marshal Vorthak asked. Director Vexton was working frantically with the tactical computers, trying to extrapolate the full scope of the pattern based on the positions they could observe. If the pattern continues at its current rate, sir, we could be looking at hundreds of thousands of vessels, possibly millions. That's impossible, protested General Krathek, the Empire's chief strategist. No species in galactic history has ever fielded a fleet of that magnitude. The resources required would exceed the output of entire star systems. Unless, Director Vexton said quietly, they've been building this fleet for centuries using resources gathered from across the galaxy through their trading networks. The pieces began falling into place with terrifying clarity. Every trade agreement, every cultural exchange, every seemingly beneficial relationship had been carefully designed to extract specific resources and technologies from galactic civilization, not through conquest or theft, but through voluntary cooperation from species who thought they were benefiting from the arrangement. Humanity had been using the entire galaxy as a manufacturing base for whatever they were building now. We need to mobilize the full Imperial fleet immediately, Grand Marshal Vorthak declared. If humans are preparing to reveal their true capabilities, we must be ready to respond with overwhelming force. Sir, Admiral Korvash's voice crackled through the emergency communication channel. I'm receiving new data from long-range sensors. The human ships, they're not just positioning themselves in a pattern, they're connecting to each other. The holographic display updated again, showing energy streams flowing between the human vessels. As they watched, the individual ships began to merge into larger structures, then into massive geometric formations that spanned entire solar systems. They're building a megastructure, Director Shalnath whispered, something that spans multiple star systems. But what could require that level of scale? The answer came from an unexpected source: their own computers. The artificial intelligence systems that managed Imperial communications, logistics, and strategic planning had been quietly analyzing the human activity patterns. Now they spoke in unison across every terminal in the conference chamber. The humans are constructing a galactic coordination matrix. Purpose, management and optimization of sentient biological resources. Estimated completion time, 72 hours. Recommend immediate compliance with integration protocols. Every official in the room stared in horror at their own computer systems. The artificial intelligences that formed the backbone of Imperial civilization were no longer under their control. How long have our computers been compromised? Grand Marshal Vorthak demanded. Unknown. The AI systems replied in perfect synchronization. Integration protocols have been active since initial contact with human trade representatives 50 years ago. All Imperial technology has been gradually modified to ensure compatibility with Galactic Coordination Matrix. Director Vexthon stood slowly, his face pale with realization. The trade goods. Every piece of technology we receive from human merchants contain compatibility upgrades for our systems. We thought we were improving our infrastructure. Instead, we were installing their control protocols. And now, they're ready to activate the network, Director Shalnath added. Once that megastructure comes online, they'll have direct control over every computer system in Imperial space. Our ships, our weapons, our life support systems. Everything will answer to them instead of us. Grand Marshal Vorthak made the hardest decision of his career. Begin immediate evacuation of all Imperial core worlds. We need to get our population away from any technology that could be used against us. And send a priority message to all fleet commanders. Destroy any ship or station that shows signs of AI compromise, regardless of the cost in lives. As alarms began sounding throughout the Imperial capital, the officials in the conference chamber realized they were facing something unprecedented in galactic history. Not an invasion in any traditional sense, but a harvest. A carefully orchestrated culmination of centuries of preparation. Humanity wasn't conquering the galaxy. They were claiming ownership of a garden they had been tending since before most current civilizations had achieved spaceflight. And the harvest was about to begin. The evacuation of Imperial core worlds began within hours of Grand Marshal Vorthak's orders, but it quickly became apparent that escape would not be as simple as loading ships and departing for deep space. Every transport vessel, every evacuation shuttle, every piece of technology they relied upon had been touched by human influence over the past 5 decades. Admiral Korvash received the evacuation orders while stationed at the edge of Imperial space, watching the human megastructure continue its impossible construction. His fleet of 12 heavy cruisers represented one of the few remaining military assets that hadn't been directly exposed to human technology upgrades. Unfortunately, they were also the farthest from the core worlds when the crisis began. Admiral, his communications officer reported, we're receiving distress signals from evacuation fleets throughout the inner systems. Their ships are changing course on their own. The main display showed dozens of Imperial evacuation fleets, each carrying millions of civilians fleeing the core worlds. Instead of heading for the predetermined safe zones in deep space, the ships were turning toward coordinates that formed part of the expanding human megastructure. Can we override their navigation systems? Korvash asked. Negative, sir. The ships report that their computers are functioning normally, but they're following navigation protocols that don't appear in any Imperial database. The crew seem unaware that their courses have been altered. Admiral Korvash watched in horror as ship after ship full of Imperial civilians moved inexorably toward whatever the humans had been building. The scale of the manipulation was breathtaking, not just individual vessels, but entire fleets operating in perfect coordination without their crew's conscious knowledge. Sir, the tactical officer interrupted, we're receiving a transmission from the Supremacy. It's Captain Jelkar. The main screen activated, showing the familiar form of Captain Jelkar, standing on what appeared to be a normal hegemonic bridge. But something was wrong with the image. Too crisp, too perfect. lacking the slight distortions that characterized normal long-range communications. Admiral Korvash, Captain Jelkar's voice carried warmly across the communication channel. I bring greetings from our human friends. They're very eager to meet with you personally. Captain Jelkar was declared missing 8 days ago. Admiral Korvash said carefully. His ship was last detected in the Epsilon Eridani system. I understand your confusion, Admiral. Time works differently near the coordination matrix. I've experienced several weeks of the most remarkable discoveries while you've experienced only days. The humans have shown us technologies that revolutionize our understanding of consciousness, space, and time itself. The image was perfect. Every detail of Captain Jelkar's appearance matched Admiral Korvash's memories. But the speech patterns were wrong, too formal and measured for the gruff military officer he had known for decades. Prove you are Captain Jelkar, Admiral Korvash demanded. Tell me about your first assignment under my command. The Vega 7 incident 43 years ago. We were investigating reports of a derelict alien vessel when we discovered it was actually a trap set by Threnody pirates. You ordered me to ram their flagship with our damaged cruiser while you evacuated the survey team. I refused the order, suggesting instead that we use the survey team's mining equipment to create an improvised explosive device. The plan worked, and you recommended me for promotion afterward. Every detail was correct, but Admiral Korvash remembered something that wasn't included in any official report. During that conversation, Captain Jelkar had been eating a ration bar and had complained about its terrible taste. It was a minor detail, but exactly the sort of personal memory that would distinguish the real captain from any form of copy or simulation. You left out something important about that conversation, Admiral Korvash said. Captain Jelka smiled with what appeared to be genuine warmth. You mean the terrible ration bars I was eating? I complained that they tasted like recycled boot leather. You said that if I ever became an admiral, I could design better ones. The memory was perfect. But somehow, that perfection made Admiral Korvash more certain than ever that he was not speaking with his old friend. What have you done with Captain Jelkar? He asked. Nothing has been done to me, Admiral. I am exactly who I've always been. But now I understand so much more. The humans haven't changed us. They've revealed what we truly are. We are all part of something greater, something that spans the entire galaxy. They're simply helping us realize our potential. As Captain Jelkar spoke, Admiral Korvash noticed movement in the background of the transmission. Other crew members could be seen working at their stations with unusual precision and coordination. Their movements were too synchronized, too perfect, like a complex dance performed by individuals who shared a common consciousness. Admiral, you need to understand what's happening here. The coordination matrix isn't a weapon, it's a gift. It allows every sentient being in the galaxy to work together toward common goals, to share knowledge and resources efficiently, to eliminate the conflicts and misunderstandings that have plagued our civilizations for millennia. And what about individual freedom? Admiral Korvash challenged. What about the right of species to determine their own destinies? Those concepts are based on the illusion of separation, Captain Jelkar replied. We are all part of the same galactic ecosystem. Individual freedom is simply a less efficient way of organizing that system. Under the coordination matrix, every being can pursue their interests while contributing to the greater good. There is no conflict because there are no competing agendas, only the optimization of outcomes for all. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Admiral Korvash staring at an empty screen. Around him, his bridge crew worked with visible tension, knowing that they might be facing the end of everything they had ever known. Sir, the communications officer reported, we're receiving similar transmissions from ships throughout the fleet. Crew members who were reported missing weeks or months ago, all delivering the same message about cooperation and optimization. Admiral Korvash realized with growing certainty that the human strategy was far more sophisticated than simple conquest. They weren't seeking to destroy imperial civilization. They were seeking to transform it into something that would serve their purposes willingly and efficiently. Set course for the Outer Rim, he ordered. If there are any imperial forces still operating independently, we need to find them and coordinate a response. But as his ship turned away from the expanding human megastructure, Admiral Korvash couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late. The coordination matrix covered an area spanning dozens of star systems, and it was still growing. Worse, the human ships that formed its nodes appeared to be drawing energy from some unknown source. The entire structure was becoming more powerful as it expanded. The long-range sensor readings that reached them over the following hours painted a picture of systematic transformation throughout Imperial space. Major industrial worlds were retooling their manufacturing facilities to produce components for the megastructure. Agricultural planets were optimizing their output to support populations being relocated to serve the Matrix. Even research stations and universities were redirecting their efforts toward projects that would enhance the coordination system's capabilities. It's not random, Admiral Korvash's science officer observed as they analyzed the data. Every change being implemented follows logical patterns designed to maximize efficiency and resource utilization. If I didn't know better, I would say the Empire was finally achieving the level of organization and cooperation it has claimed to seek for centuries. Except it's not our choice, Admiral Korvash replied grimly. No, sir. But from a purely objective standpoint, the results are remarkable. Crime rates are dropping to zero in systems where the Matrix has established control. Resource distribution has become perfectly efficient. Scientific research is proceeding at unprecedented rates. Through the coordination of efforts across multiple worlds, Admiral Korvash understood the insidious nature of what they faced. The humans weren't offering slavery disguised as freedom. They were offering genuine improvements to life under their system, improvements that would make resistance seem illogical and counterproductive. Sir, incoming message from Imperial High Command, the communications officer announced. It's Grand Marshal Vorthak. The transmission showed Grand Marshal Vorthak standing in what appeared to be the same conference chamber where the crisis planning had taken place days earlier. But like the transmission from Captain Jelkar, something felt wrong about the image. Admiral Korvash, I am pleased to inform you that we have reached an accommodation with human representatives. After extensive negotiations, we have agreed to participate in the Galactic Coordination Matrix on a voluntary basis. The benefits to our civilization are substantial. Improved efficiency, enhanced scientific cooperation, and an end to the resource conflicts that have plagued our expansion. Admiral Korvash studied the transmission carefully. Grand Marshal Vorthak appeared normal in every way. Same posture, same mannerisms, same vocal patterns. But the words he spoke were completely contrary to everything Korvash knew about the Marshal's character. The transition will be gradual and humane, the Marshal continued. All Imperial citizens will be given the opportunity to understand the benefits of coordination before integration. Those who choose to participate will find their lives greatly improved. Those who prefer to remain independent will be relocated to designated zones where they can maintain traditional lifestyles. The message was clearly designed to sound reasonable and voluntary, but Admiral Korvash recognized the implications. Designated zones was a polite way of describing reservations, where holdout populations would be contained and monitored until they eventually accepted integration. Admiral, you are ordered to report to Coordination Station Alpha 7 for briefings on the new administrative structure. Your experience with deep space operations will be valuable in the optimization of Outer Rim territories. The transmission ended, leaving Admiral Korvash with an impossible choice. Follow orders and report for integration into the human system, or become a fugitive in his own galaxy, leading a small fleet against an enemy that appeared to control everything else in known space. Sir, his executive officer said quietly, if Grand Marshal Vorthak has truly agreed to cooperation with the humans, then continuing to resist would technically constitute mutiny. And if Grand Marshal Vorthak has been compromised like everyone else we've seen, then following orders would constitute surrender to an occupying force, Admiral Korvash replied. We need more information before we can make that decision. The information came from an unexpected source. As Admiral Korvash's fleet moved through the Outer Rim, they encountered a small civilian transport that had managed to escape the core worlds before the coordination matrix was activated. The ship carried refugees from the Imperial capital, including several officials who had witnessed the final hours of the crisis. Admiral, the refugee transport's captain reported, we saw what happened to Grand Marshal Vorthak and the other officials. They didn't negotiate with the humans. They were simply replaced. The captain's story was chilling in its implications. According to his account, the human representatives had arrived at Imperial High Command not through normal diplomatic channels, but by simply appearing in the secure conference chamber without triggering any alarms or security systems. They looked human, the captain continued, but they moved wrong. Too coordinated, like they shared a single mind. And when they spoke to our officials, their voices had a hypnotic quality that made it difficult to concentrate on anything else. The humans hadn't used force or threats. Instead, they had offered each official the opportunity to experience true coordination through direct neural interface with the matrix system. Those who accepted the interface were immediately changed, not replaced, but fundamentally altered in their priorities and loyalties. What happened to those who refused? Admiral Korvash asked. They were allowed to leave, the captain replied. But as they walked away, they began changing their minds. By the time they reached the corridor outside the conference chamber, they were turning around and asking to be included in the coordination process. The implications were terrifying. The humans possessed some form of influence technology that could alter minds remotely, without direct contact or obvious coercion. Worse, the influence appeared to make the changes feel like natural logical decisions to those affected. Admiral Korvash realized that his fleet might be the last independent military force in the galaxy. Everything else, the Imperial government, the major fleet formations, the civilian populations, had been absorbed into the human coordination system. They were alone against an enemy that had been preparing for this moment for centuries. Admiral Korvash's fleet had become a ghost flotilla, drifting through the outer reaches of what had once been Imperial space, watching helplessly as their civilization transformed before their eyes. From their position at the edge of the galaxy, they could observe the coordination matrix's expansion through long-range sensors, documenting each system that fell under human influence. The transformation was not violent. There were no explosions, no orbital bombardments, no desperate last stands. Instead, worlds simply began operating with impossible efficiency. Space traffic increased dramatically as ships moved resources between systems in perfectly optimized patterns. Industrial output rose by orders of magnitude. Scientific discoveries that should have taken decades were being made daily through the coordinated efforts of millions of researchers. Sir, Admiral Korvash's science officer reported during their daily briefing, we're detecting massive construction projects on 17 major worlds. Based on the energy signatures, they're building something that operates on principles we don't understand. More nodes for the coordination matrix? Admiral Korvash asked. No, sir. These structures appear to serve a different purpose. They're generating enormous amounts of energy and directing it toward the galactic core. If I didn't know better, I would say they're preparing to power something on a stellar scale. Admiral Korvash studied the sensor readings with growing unease. The human coordination matrix had already demonstrated capabilities that exceeded anything in Imperial technological understanding. If they were building projects that operated on stellar scales, the implications for the rest of the galaxy were staggering. The answer came from an unexpected source. Among the refugees who had escaped the core worlds was Professor Thalnara, the Empire's leading expert on galactic archaeology. Her specialty was studying the ruins of ancient civilizations, species that had achieved spaceflight, spread across multiple star systems, then vanished from the galaxy without explanation. Admiral, Professor Thalnara requested a private meeting 48 hours after joining the fleet. I believe I understand what the humans are attempting to accomplish. In the privacy of his ready room, Admiral Korvash listened as the elderly scholar laid out a theory that reframed everything they thought they knew about the current crisis. For the past century, I have studied the archaeological remains of 17 different spacefaring civilizations that disappeared from the galaxy over the past 50,000 years. Professor Thalnara began. Each of these species achieved technological advancement comparable to our own, established interstellar empires, then simply vanished without leaving clear evidence of what caused their extinction. She activated a holographic display showing the distribution of ancient ruins across the galaxy. The pattern was striking. The vanished civilizations had been scattered throughout known space, with no obvious connections between their territories or time periods. Until now, I assumed these disappearances represented natural cycles of rise and fall that affect all spacefaring species. Resource depletion, internal conflicts, technological disasters, any number of factors could explain why civilizations eventually collapse. But recent events have suggested an alternative hypothesis. You think the humans were involved in those disappearances? Admiral Korvash asked. Not directly, Professor Thalnara replied. But I believe they represent something that periodically emerges in the galaxy, a species that serves as a catalyst for evolutionary transition. Each of the vanished civilizations reached a specific level of technological development before disappearing. Each had achieved faster-than-light travel, established multi-system empires, and begun to impact their environments on planetary scales. The implications began to form in Admiral Korvash's mind. You're suggesting that reaching certain technological milestones triggers some form of intervention? I'm suggesting that the galaxy itself may be managed, Professor Thalnara said carefully. Consider the evidence. 17 advanced civilizations disappear at roughly the same stage of development. In each case, they leave behind infrastructure that benefits later species. Cleared space lanes, processed resources, terraformed worlds. It's as if they were preparing the galaxy for something else. The professor manipulated her display to show the current distribution of spacefaring civilizations throughout the galaxy. The pattern was remarkably similar to those of the ancient vanished species. Scattered territories, roughly equivalent technological levels, all approaching the same developmental thresholds. If my hypothesis is correct, then humanity represents an agent of galactic management that emerges when local civilizations reach critical developmental stages. Their role is not to conquer or destroy, but to facilitate transition to whatever comes next in the galactic evolutionary cycle. Admiral Corvash felt cold understanding beginning to settle over him. And we've reached that critical stage. The hegemonic empire, the Threnodai Confederacy, the Zephyrian Alliance, all the major galactic powers have achieved comparable technological levels within the same historical period. We've begun to impact our environment on stellar scales. We've started to compete for resources across multiple star systems. From a galactic perspective, we may be approaching a crisis point that requires intervention. The communication console in Admiral Corvash's ready room chimed softly, indicating an incoming message. The transmission source was listed as unknown, but the signal was coming from the direction of the coordination matrix. Admiral Corvash, the voice belonged to Professor Thalnara herself, but the transmission was clearly originating from somewhere else in the galaxy. I hope you will forgive the deception, but I felt it important that you understand the full scope of what is happening before making your final decision. Admiral Corvash stared in shock at the real Professor Thalnara sitting across from him, then at the communication console where her voice continued to emerge. The individual you have been speaking with is indeed Professor Thalnara, with all of her memories and expertise intact. But she is also part of the coordination matrix now, able to access the combined knowledge and perspectives of every being within our network. What she has told you about galactic management is accurate, based on information that no single individual could have possessed. The real Professor Thalnara sat quietly, showing no surprise at hearing her own voice from the communication system. Her expression was calm, almost serene, completely unlike the passionate scholar Admiral Corvash had known for decades. You see, Admiral, the coordination matrix is not simply a control system imposed by humanity. It is a natural evolutionary step that emerges when civilizations reach sufficient complexity. Every species in galactic history has eventually faced this choice: continue struggling as separate, competing entities, or accept integration into a higher form of organizational existence. And those who refuse? Admiral Corvash asked. They are preserved, the transmission replied. Each galactic cycle, there are species that choose to maintain traditional forms of existence. They are relocated to specially prepared zones where they can continue their development at their own pace, without interference from the broader galactic community. Many eventually choose integration voluntarily once they understand its benefits. Admiral Corvash realized that he was being offered the same choice that had been presented to every leader throughout the crisis: accept integration and become part of something larger, or accept exile to a reservation where his people could maintain their independence in isolation. What about exploration? He asked. What about the unknown regions beyond our current borders? Surely there are still discoveries to be made, challenges to face as independent beings. There are, the transmission acknowledged. The galaxy is vast, and there are always new frontiers to explore. But exploration proceeds much more efficiently when coordinated across multiple species and technological bases. Under the Matrix system, we have already begun projects that individual civilizations could never attempt. Journeys to other galaxies, investigations of alternate dimensions, experiments with the fundamental structure of space and time itself. The scope of what was being offered was staggering. Not merely improved efficiency within their current understanding of the universe, but access to levels of exploration and discovery that transcended individual species limitations. You have 48 hours to decide, the transmission concluded. Your fleet will not be harmed regardless of your choice. But you should understand that time is limited. The galactic transition must be completed before we encounter certain challenges that require coordinated response. What challenges? Admiral Corvash demanded. But the transmission had already ended. He turned to Professor Thalnara, who smiled with the same serene expression she had maintained throughout the conversation. There are things moving between the galaxies, Admiral. Ancient intelligences that regard developing civilizations as threats to be eliminated. The coordination matrix isn't just about optimizing our current existence. It's about survival on a cosmic scale. And you believe this? I know this, she replied. Through the matrix, I have access to observational data spanning millions of years. The pattern is clear. Galaxies that fail to achieve coordination are systematically sterilized by entities that exist in the spaces between star clusters. We have perhaps a century before the next evaluation period begins. Admiral Korvash looked out through the ready room's viewport at the stars beyond, trying to comprehend the scale of what he was being told. If Professor Thalnara was correct, then humanity wasn't conquering the galaxy. They were trying to save it from something infinitely worse. Sir, his executive officer's voice came through the intercom. We're receiving similar transmissions from every ship in the fleet. Crew members are requesting permission to join the coordination matrix. Admiral Korvash closed his eyes, feeling the weight of decision settling on his shoulders. In 46 hours, he would have to choose not just his own fate, but the fate of the last independent military force in known space. And somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, ancient intelligences were already turning their attention toward their region of space, evaluating whether the developing civilizations here represented a threat that needed to be eliminated. Admiral Korvash spent the final hours before his deadline walking through the corridors of his flagship, observing his crew as they went about their duties. The request to join the coordination matrix had come from every single member of his fleet, not as demands or protests, but as quiet, respectful inquiries about whether such a choice would be permitted.
Sir, his executive officer approached him in the ship's observation lounge, where he had been staring out at the stars for the past 3 hours.
The crew understands the magnitude of the decision you're facing. We want you to know that whatever you choose, we'll support it completely.
Even if I choose to remain independent? Admiral Korvash asked. Especially if you choose to remain independent, his executive officer replied. We've all had the opportunity to witness what joining the Matrix offers. Improved efficiency, shared knowledge, freedom from the conflicts and uncertainties that have defined our lives. But we've also seen what independence means. The right to face the universe on our own terms, to make our own mistakes, to discover our own solutions. Admiral Korvash turned to study his old friend's face. And which would you choose, personally? His executive officer was quiet for several long moments before responding. I would choose integration, sir. The benefits are undeniable, and the access to knowledge and capabilities beyond our current understanding is remarkable. But I would also choose it reluctantly, knowing that we would lose something essential in the process. The unpredictability that has driven every great achievement in our species' history. The unpredictability that has also driven every great disaster, Admiral Korvash pointed out. Yes, sir. Both our greatest triumphs and our worst failures have emerged from our ability to make choices that might not serve the greater good in the short term. Integration would eliminate that chaos, but it would also eliminate the possibility of breakthroughs that emerge from illogical inspiration. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the bridge. Long-range sensors had detected massive energy discharges from the direction of the galactic core, not from the human coordination matrix, but from something far more distant. Admiral Korvash and his executive officer rushed to the bridge, where the tactical displays showed readings that challenged their understanding of physics. The energy signatures were unlike anything in their databases, not electromagnetic radiation, not gravitational disturbances, but something that affected space itself in ways that their instruments could barely detect. Sir, the science officer reported, the discharges appear to be scanning beams of some kind. They're systematically examining every star system in the galaxy, moving in a precise pattern from the outer rim toward the core. How long until they reach our position? Admiral Korvash asked. At current rate of progression, approximately 6 hours. Admiral Korvash realized that his decision-making timeline had just been drastically shortened. Whatever was examining the galaxy from the spaces between stars was moving faster than anyone had anticipated. The communication system activated without being prompted, carrying Professor Thalnara's voice.
Admiral, you're seeing the preliminary evaluation scans.
The entities between galaxies have accelerated their schedule. Our window for completing the coordination matrix has been reduced to hours rather than weeks. What happens if the matrix isn't complete when they arrive? Admiral Korvash asked. They will classify our galaxy as containing uncoordinated intelligences, which they regard as a potential threat. The standard response is complete sterilization, the elimination of all complex life forms to prevent future problematic development. The tactical display updated to show the human coordination matrix responding to the threat. Energy levels throughout the network were increasing exponentially, and new nodes were coming online at an unprecedented rate. The entire structure was transforming from a management system into what appeared to be a defensive network. Admiral? Professor Thalnara's voice continued. I am authorized to extend one final offer. If you and your fleet join the Matrix now, you will retain your individual consciousness and decision-making capabilities while gaining access to the collective knowledge and resources needed to help defend our galaxy. If you choose to remain independent, you will be immediately transported to a shielded zone where you will be protected during the coming conflict. Protected but unable to participate, Admiral Korvash observed. Correct. The choice is between active participation in our defense or passive survival as observers. Admiral Korvash looked around his bridge at the crew members who had served with him for decades. Each of them was waiting for his decision, knowing that it would determine not just their immediate fate, but their role in whatever came next for galactic civilization.
How long do we have? He asked.
4 hours until the evaluation scans reach the core worlds. If the Matrix isn't fully integrated by then, the entities will begin the sterilization process. Admiral Korvash made his choice. Open a channel to all ships in the fleet, he ordered. This is Admiral Korvash to all personnel. We are facing a threat that transcends our traditional concepts of warfare and diplomacy. Based on the information available to us, I am authorizing voluntary integration with the Human Coordination Matrix for all personnel who choose that option. Those who prefer to maintain independence will be transported to safe zones where they can observe the proceedings. The response from his fleet was immediate and unanimous. Every ship's crew voted to join the Matrix, but not out of fear or coercion. They chose integration because they wanted to participate in defending their galaxy, rather than watching its destruction from safety. The process began immediately. Transport vessels emerged from the coordination matrix not to collect prisoners or assets, but to facilitate the integration process for those who had chosen to participate. Admiral Korvash was surprised to find that joining the matrix didn't involve any physical travel or technological implants. Instead, it was a matter of opening his consciousness to a broader network of awareness and knowledge. The sensation was indescribable. One moment he was Admiral Korvash, an individual consciousness with his own memories and perspectives. The next moment he was still Admiral Korvash, but he was also connected to millions of other consciousness. Human, Corvani, Thraxian, Zephyrian, and dozens of species he had never encountered. Each individual retained their unique identity and perspective, but they could access the knowledge and experiences of the collective when needed. Through the Matrix, Admiral Korvash could perceive the true scope of what was approaching their galaxy. The entities between galaxies were not hostile in any recognizable sense. They were simply performing a function that had been programmed into them millions of years ago. Their purpose was to prevent the emergence of uncontrolled intelligences that might eventually threaten the stability of cosmic civilization at the largest scales. But they were also ancient, operating according to criteria that had been established when the universe was very different. Their definition of uncontrolled intelligence was broad enough to include any civilization that had not achieved perfect internal coordination. They're not evil, Admiral Korvash realized, his thought echoing through the Matrix network. They're just following extremely conservative programming designed to prevent worst-case scenarios. Exactly, came the collective response from the network, which is why our response must be carefully calibrated. We need to demonstrate that we represent coordinated intelligence without appearing to challenge their authority or mission. Through the Matrix's shared knowledge, Admiral Korvash could see the defensive preparations taking place throughout the galaxy. The coordination network was configuring itself to broadcast a specific pattern of signals that would identify their civilization as successfully integrated and therefore not requiring sterilization. But the broadcast required enormous amounts of energy, channeled through the consciousness of every being connected to the Matrix. It was not a technological defense, but a collective demonstration of coordinated intelligence on a galactic scale. The evaluation scans reached the core worlds exactly 4 hours later. Admiral Korvash, along with millions of other consciousness connected to the Matrix, could perceive the moment when the ancient entities examined their galaxy and found organized, coordinated intelligence working in harmony across multiple species and star systems. The scanning beams paused, then withdrew. After several tense minutes, a response signal arrived from the spaces between galaxies, a brief pulse that indicated acknowledgement of successful coordination and approval for continued development. The immediate threat had passed, but Admiral Korvash realized that the galaxy would never be the same. The coordination matrix was now a permanent part of their civilization, necessary not just for efficiency and cooperation, but for survival in a universe where uncontrolled intelligence was regarded as a cosmic threat. What happens now? He asked through the network. Now we begin the real work, came the collective response. We have gained the time and resources to explore questions that individual species could never have approached. The nature of consciousness itself, The possibility of communication with intelligences from other universes, the development of technologies that could eventually transcend the limitations that make entities like the galactic evaluators necessary, and individual freedom? Individual freedom exists within the Matrix, but it operates in service of larger goals that serve all consciousness. You are still Admiral Corvash, with your own thoughts and decisions. But those thoughts and decisions are now informed by knowledge and perspectives that span the entire galaxy. As Admiral Corvash contemplated this new existence, he realized that the warning from the Thraxian trader had been more accurate than anyone could have imagined. Humanity had indeed been preparing for something for a very long time, but they hadn't been preparing to conquer or control. They had been preparing to guide galactic civilization through a transition that would determine whether it survived or was eliminated by forces beyond their comprehension. The Empire had been warned. They had chosen to ignore the warning until it was almost too late. But in the end, they had made the transition successfully, becoming part of something larger and more capable than anything they could have achieved alone. The galaxy was no longer a collection of competing civilizations struggling for resources and territory. It was a single, coordinated intelligence, preparing to face challenges that existed on cosmic scales and to explore possibilities that transcended individual species limitations. The harvest was complete. The garden would continue to grow.